But today we are going to have a panel discussion looking at the different benefits per each panelist of the RAF Spitfire and the US's P-51 Mustang. This is going to be quite a talk. I'm looking forward to this one today, and I'm sure everybody else is as well. Before we get started, I see that we have mostly everybody coming through. I just want to say thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation before we get started for their continued support, and particularly to the funding that they secure through Generac Power Systems. It's excellent to have a great sponsor such as the foundation, and to have another great sponsor on top of that with Generac Power Systems. So we're very fortunate today with those to keep these virtual programs going. We are open at the museum, but we're still going to keep these virtual programs on our plate so we can reach as many people as possible. And to be quite honest, these are just a lot of fun to listen to these gentlemen talk about little interests of history. Also, before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody, if you have any questions for our panelists today, please submit them via the chat function. You can send those questions directly to me. I'll be putting them in a PowerPoint, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation. And speaking of the presentation, let me introduce our panelists today. We have the Museum Director, Mr. Chris Kolakowski, with us. We also have our Curator of Exhibits, Mr. Gregory Krueger. And then, of course, we have our Curator of History, Mr. Kevin Hampton. And like I said, they are going to discuss what they feel is the most effective and important plane in World War II with the Spitfire and the P-51 Mustang. I think that's all the comments I get to make. So I'm going to turn it straight over to our panelists. Gentlemen, ding, ding, ding. Let the first round begin.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eric. Just wanted to say hello as well. This is a kind of a fun one for us. We're going to take a different approach than we have in the past. You know, usually if you're joining us, you're used to seeing the Chris and Kevin show. And today we're going to expand that a little bit. And Greg's going to join us here, and we're going to have a fun debate. I would call it more of a debate, actually, Eric, than I would a panel discussion. And it's going to be really kind of fun. It's something that you see here amongst our staff quite actually a bit, where each of us has our own particular interests and experiences in the particular areas of research. And it's just kind of fun to challenge each other a little bit, because that's what history is. It's a conversation, though. It's a discussion. It's not a black and white, you're right, I'm wrong. It's more of a let's come to an understanding. And this is an opportunity really to share a fun perspective, if you will, to a degree. So we're going to take this model a little differently. It is going to be a 3-round debate. We have identified amongst the 2 competitors, if you will, the 3 main sections of what we want to talk about today. And of course, we want to talk about the specifications. So for you gearheads out there, not me, because I haven't the slightest clue what anything is that they just sent me in their PowerPoint or the slides about horsepower and something like that. So I have no clue, but either way. So we're going to talk about specs and how each one has its own merits and where they fall in and why certain specifications are better than others. We're going to talk about combat effectiveness. So how is it actually useful in the European theater, and the impact on the war. Now, there's a couple guidelines, gentlemen. We are keeping our discussion to the European theater, which also includes the Mediterranean theater, of course, because that is the same operation area. And I will point out that because we had to give some fairness truly to the 2 planes that we're talking about today, we were unable to bring them out of the classification that they are and actually include truly the champion of the European skies, which would be the P-47 Thunderbolts. I mean, in all honesty, we all know this.
Pardon me, Kevin, I swallowed wrong.
Oh, heavens. I hope you're all right. Because I really know we wanted to be fair. I mean, all honesty, let's be honest. And I'm not biased at all. I mean, I'm not in the slightest, as the staff will know. My great uncle, may or may not have been a pilot of a P-47 during the war. So, it's just a little biased, but that's okay. it's okay. We want to give you guys the chance because otherwise you wouldn't have one. So either way, we'll start this fun format with a discussion of the fighters, not the fighter bombers and not the other aircraft. We're going to talk about the fighters of the European theater. So gentlemen, we're going to start with opening arguments. And of course, I would say age before beauty. However, because I would also argue that the Spitfire is just as beautiful as it is old, we'll start with Chris.
Gee, thanks. And I have some ancestry. I dug up my RAF t-shirt today. I had ancestors in the Royal Flying Corps, later the Royal Air Force. And my grandfather was attached to the Polish Air Force as well in World War II. My other ancestors in World War I. So I note the family connections that I have as well. In some ways, to quote Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, some debates are chicken or steak. It becomes time to order. And that's sort of what we're discussing here today. I am arguing in favor of the Supermarine Spitfire, which I argue is, it should be first, But 1A is the P-51. I am not arguing in the comments that I'm going to make today. I am not arguing that P-51 was a bad airplane. But I would point out to you that both of these aircraft are outstanding Anglo-American fighters. If you look at the history of the P-51, I don't think the U.S. Army Air Force has it unless the Royal Air Force goes and talks to them and requests the design in the first place. And that points up the main thing is that the main driver of the two greatest fighters in the air war over Europe is the Royal Air Force. They both have their seeds in the Royal Air Force. The Spitfire, we'll get into a lot of the Spitfire. I simply will say this: when the Royal Air Force at the end of the war, or shortly after the war, when they were beginning to retire the last of the World War II era aircraft, they chose to create a signature commemorative flight called Battle of Britain Flight, and they chose the Spitfire as the symbol of the Royal Air Force non-bomber. They had a Lancaster bomber that was involved in their commemorative flight also. But otherwise, it's the Spitfire. And there is no other fighter that embodies the air war first to last from 1939 to 1945 that was present and embodies the air war over Europe from the Allied side, quite like the Supermarine Spitfire.
Excellent. And now, of course, also the beauty part, perhaps not the age part, because it is slightly younger and a little bit newer to the scene, but the P-51 with Greg.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thanks, Chris. First of all, I'm a piston head. I'm a total gearhead. I really get into engines and everything mechanical. And what's interesting is, if you folks don't know, these two aircraft, they pretty much share a motor. They share the same engine. While it's a Rolls-Royce design for the P-51, it's built by American companies, so there's very few arguments that you can give about performance because, again, they have the same power plant. What we get down to is tactical capabilities. I'm going to argue, as Top Brass did too, as far as like a fighter bomber, escort bomber, range. The Mustang can fly into the heart of Germany and back. Spitfire can't.
Fair point. Both good points on both sides, and we'll see that throughout the day. But so to begin with, of course, we want to talk about why we're talking about both of these, because for those that have been into the museum before, you'll probably recognize some of the, perhaps the silhouette of something hanging from our ceiling, right, Greg?
Correct. Oh, and let's get specific too. I'm going to be referring or talking about the P-51D, which is one of the final, it is the final version within World War II. Now the aircraft went on and fought in Korea, for instance, under a different name, some different configurations. Again, I'm going to be talking about the P-51D today, which, again, as Kevin alluded to, is hanging above our galleries in the World War II. Yes, thank you. Lieutenant George, excuse me, I can talk, from Seymour, flew one, terrific ace. And we have a replica of that plane, again, in our galleries. It's beautiful, beautiful sight to see.
And not to be outdone, because we wouldn't just throw in a random competitor, of course, because there are other Wisconsinites that actually flew the Spitfire, right, Chris?
That is correct. Most notably, of course, in the 3 Eagle squadrons with the Royal Air Force, and we've identified one Badger that was killed and is listed as missing in action. Was killed aboard a Spitfire in 121 Eagle Squadron, and today is commemorated on the RAF's Runnymede Memorial in the UK. I haven't looked exactly into what happened. He was shot down May 4th, 1942 on a fighter sweep over France. And there's some evidence he may lie at the bottom of the channel, entombed in his aircraft.
Wow.
So this is not a theoretical proposition. And the Spitfire was also manned, as we can discuss more in detail, was actually used by 2 U.S. fighter groups in the Mediterranean as well. So it is part of you. It did see some service in the hands of U.S. pilots. So this is an aircraft that has some service in the USAAF, as well, of course, in the Royal Air Force and the attached air forces as well.
Excellent. So let's get the technical stuff right out of the way, because it's, you know, numbers and things like that, right? So let's start right out of the chute with the specification classification that we talked about. And I'm going to share my screen here for a second. We're going to hope this works. What'd you see?
We have two titles, basically.
Perfect. Now I have to be fair as well. This is going to be the one and only meters reference, because I did not go in to include the rest of the meters. All right, gentlemen. So this is the first category of specification. We've got 3 categories of specifications. I know absolutely nothing about what any of this means or why I should care. So riddle me this. We'll start with Greg. What does it mean, and why does a wing area and wingspan matter?
Well, first of all, the 2 aircraft really have, well, they were designed totally differently. The Mustang, it went into science. They took models, three-dimensional models. They went into wind tunnels, and they designed the wings specifically to function very well. They used the latest science, the latest testing equipment, and again, their airfoil wings, as they're referred to as, were scientifically, you know, accurate for the time. They were their most advanced wing shape, wing design to come into existence. As you probably know, the way that an aircraft achieves lift is that more air will fly or pass over the top of the wing, which creates a lower area of pressure. Therefore, that wing wants to lift. And again, that's what we refer to as lift. The Mustang, what they did specifically is that the fattest part of the wing, instead of having it like up front, like if we go back to our galleries and you look at that soft lift camel that's up there, you can get a glance at the cross section of the wing. And you can see how the fattest part of that wing is pretty close to the nose. It's pretty close to the leading edge of that wing. Whereas the Mustang, they moved that fattest section to the middle of the wing. And that just allowed for different air characteristics. It was a very smooth design. The air flowed very well, or flows very well, excuse me. Provides great performance for low and top speed. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. You can see that cross section there. And while it's hard not to have a comparison to really you know, examine the 2, I guess, side by side, hopefully I've explained that a little bit better.
Excellent. And Chris, anything we should know about the first set of specifications from the Spitfire side?
One of the things that I'd point out, and I'd ask you to call up one of the photos I sent you of the Spit so you can see the shape of the wing.
Of course.
One of the things that the Spitfire is designed to do, both of these are designed as air superiority fighters. The difference, and we can get into this, the difference of the relative doctrine of the 2 air forces. The Royal Air Force, when they're designing this thing in the late 1930s, first Spitfires joined the Royal Air Force in 1938. And they will serve, the last ones will actually leave in the late 1950s. And this gives you an idea. This is a formation of Spits here over the United Kingdom. One of the things you can kind of get a sense of here, and I would, if we have another picture, so you can see the actual shape of the wing.
Mm-hmm. Maybe
Supermarine was actually had built seaplanes. That's a better one right there. A Spitfire taking on a German buzz bomb, Spitfire being on the right. And you can see the very wide wing. It's short. It's a little bit shorter than although there are variations that actually become very long and very pointed for the longer range versions of the Spitfire. But you'll notice the kind of tending toward a teardrop shape. I forget exactly what they call it. It creates a great deal of lift, but it also creates a tremendous amount of speed. One of the things they wanted was there you go. That's perfect. That's a perfect illustration of Spitfire 2 during the Battle of Britain right there. And one of the things that they wanted to do was they wanted to create lift. They wanted to be efficient, but they also wanted a wing big enough to carry guns and also a retractable undercarriage. This is a fighter that is designed to be fast. It's, in fact, the fuselage, you'll see the high, narrow fuselage. You'll notice from the dimensions it's taller, but it's also lighter. This was actually based on a plane that had won speed records for Supermarine, a seaplane that they had designed in the early 1930s. They adapted that design for the Spitfire. So the Spitfire is designed to be maneuverable. It's designed to be fast. It's designed to climb very quickly. And it's also designed to basically close to knife fighting range against any possible German and Italian opponents. And that's basically what it's designed to do. And it does that very well, I might add. But you can see the difference in philosophy based on these characteristics here. And they show up in the design based on the assumptions that both companies make, both services make in how they design their fighters.
Yeah, Kevin, if you could pull up like perhaps the 375th Fighter Squadron North American P-51D image.
Yep.
Here we get a good glimpse of what Chris was referring to, the edges of, or the outer edges, excuse me, of the Spitfire. Notice how the Mustang is very broad. The wing is very broad. It comes to the end, it just pretty much ends there. Whereas the Spitfire was very elliptical in shape out there. In Chris's perspective, it really added to a lot of agility with the Spitfire, something that's actually criticized with the Mustang. Again, a lot of strength, a lot of power, great lift, blah, 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 but not the tightest turning aircraft in the theater.
Fair point. All right, let's go on to the next set of specs. If I can advance. And we'll begin again. Actually, let's flip it up this time. We'll mix it up a little bit. Chris, let's start with you. Why should I care about all this?
Couple of points to be made here. Number one, the P-51A and B models had an Allison engine in them. And they were subpar is the word that would be used. It's only when the British gave them the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. And that's one of the reasons that I chose the Spitfire 9, which actually this is a 1942-43 plane on the right versus a 1944-45 plane on the left. There were other versions of the Spitfire that actually got more speed and had a heavier weight. But for the Spitfire 9 was one of the most used air superiority fighters in the middle and the latter part of the war. But you can see, again, the power. The Spitfire is designed it's designed for the defense of the United Kingdom. And you can see power, it climbs very quickly. You can see the rate of climb. It can get up very quickly. It's designed for what it did very effectively starting during the Battle of Britain, is when the Germans are forming up over France and begin to cross the channel, they can scramble and with a matter of minutes be at altitude ready to fight the Germans. It's designed with defense in mind. Of course, it performed many other missions very well also. But you can see the power. It's designed to get up there. It's fast. 404 miles an hour is not slow necessarily, but it loses a little bit in the speed over the P-51. But the P-51 takes a little while to get to the fight, but when it gets to the fight, it can get in the fight. The Spitfire will get to the fight first, and it will be ready to rock and roll. And you can see the service ceiling actually is a little bit higher than the P-51, although I would argue that's essentially a push. I don't know how you feel about that, Greg.
Yeah,
I would argue that's essentially a push.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Chris.
Yeah,
So-
for someone like me who has very little understanding of what any of this means, because I just put gas in my car and it moves, and that's all I know in terms of how technology works. But I think when you think of the Battle of Britain, you think of that dogfight. You think of the movie Dunkirk, and it's the Spits coming across the channel, and you're really thinking, in my opinion, you're trying to get that maneuverability, which is speed, but I would also assume that it's also rate of climb. An element of that, being able to get up into the clouds and come down, like you see in those dogfighting training videos, where you want to come out of the dive from the sun or from the higher vantage point. But you'd also think that speed does play a part in it. And Greg, this looks like your challenger over here wins out on that, right?
Yeah, slightly so. And what you alluded to, Kevin, I mean, that's highly accurate. I mean, yes, you want a plane that's maneuverable so you can outturn your enemy, whether you're chasing him down or whether he's on your tail. You want that maneuverability, dive rate, speed. For instance, in a dive, yeah, if you're in trouble, if you have 2 or 3 of the enemy fighters behind you in pursuit, boy, it's nice to be able to point that nose down and just get out of there. The speed is very important. And what just getting back to a point that Chris kind of brought up before, when the Mustang was first developed, it was developed with the Allison motor in it, which the main reason why the Rolls-Royce Merlin 66 is better is because of its induction system. It's a forced induction system and has a 2-speed supercharger in there. So that's a mechanical gearing that comes right off the crankcase, and what it does is it compresses the air before it even gets into the motor. So you're forcing a lot of oxygen into those motors. You mix that with 150 octane fuel, and you just have tiny little explosions everywhere. That's how these motors produce so much power. And that's also the reason why you have such a great ceiling with these engines. Again, when as you get up to 40,000 feet, oxygen it's just not in the same amounts that it is at sea level. You're running out of oxygen the higher you go. These superchargers just cram so much air into these combustion chambers. That's how they're able to get up there and maintain that power at 40,000 feet. Again, is because of the Rolls-Royce super 2-speed, 2-stage supercharger.
I would like to point out once again, it's the Spitfire engine that made the P-51 what it was. The P-51D, that is.
Ooh.
And it's funny too, because the Brit, they get their hands, they wanted the thing. We say no, they wanted what, the Curtiss P-40, Chris, I believe is what they wanted us to build.
Yeah.
They said no. North American Aviation Company said no. We'll have our own design. Well, within like 100 days, they had their own design. Within like 120 days, this thing's up in the air. Again, it had the Allison, so yeah, little subpar, but it's just funny then. So the Brits get their hands on a few of these things. They're like, yeah, it's pretty good, but it's a little weak underneath the hood. So they throw their own engine in there, and wow, you have a world-class fighter on your hands. It's a really interesting combination, you know, of ingenuity, you know, of just theory.
I've actually sometimes thought that the Mustang is son of Spitfire. Because the British realized they need something that's a little bit longer leg than the Spitfire. The North American aviation comes up with this, and then it's the capstone is the Spitfire engine, which again is an argument for me in favor of the Spitfire.
So an American shell with a Spitfire heart.
Right, and that's a good point, Kevin, because alongside this, the Brits had, you know, they had very limited manufacturing capabilities at this point. You know, they're under the gun. They needed the U.S. to come in with the manufacturing capabilities and just start, you know, pumping these planes out. The Mustang was designed to be mass processed. You know, this is a big production. And so the panels were designed to, you know, fit together easily. Just the whole assembly line manufacturing really proved, you know, to be essential for the Allies, because yes, it was a great fighter, but we were also able to produce like what, 8,000 of the D models during World War II.
Yeah, American industry churned them out.
That's a really interesting point, and it's not something that we talked about last week when we were talking about this a little bit more. It's interesting how World War One, the American forces are using French and British equipment. However, then you look at World War II, 20 years later, well, you know, 25 years later, and it's flipped. The British end up using a lot of American equipment in terms of the tanks and the planes and everything else. And it's a very interesting swap of experience.
One thing that is big, there are two big differences between World War I and World War II for the UK. Number one, they had passed their industrial peak at production in 1905. So ever since then, it's been ramping down. The other thing is, and perhaps definitely more important, is that in World War I, they did not have to face, they had Zeppelin raids, but they did not have to face the disruption and even the threatened disruption of the Luftwaffe. The Supermarine factory was located on the south coast of England, as a matter of fact, one of several. And so Britain ends up having to disperse a lot of their production further north and actually outsource it offshore. Yeah. And in fact, that it's through that and realizing we need more, we need to buy something from the United States and put the United States to work for us, is when in the spring of 1940, they approached North American aviation about the possibility of building them a fighter, which turns into the P-51. So you're seeing this process play out very quickly just by those two significantly different factors from the first war.
That's good to know. Yeah. All right, we'll move on to the next one, the next spec subcategory, if you will. And probably what I would have assumed would be the most informative in this category, which is, of course, its combat range, which will lead us into the next category, which is the combat effectiveness. But let's talk a little bit about the specifications of what will inform that. So we'll mix it up again, because we just talked about how nice and shiny the shell is, the American shell. We'll start with Greg.
Well, of course, you know, they needed range. The Brits needed range. The Mustang, again, it went through several iterations. One of the big things that they did, I believe with the was they installed like another fuel cell, pardon me, just after the pilot where they sit. Prior to that, it had, you know, wing tanks, you know, like everything else, internal wing tanks. But that big fuel cell behind the pilot was huge. That really increased its range effectively. They had to totally rework the airplane, of course, because all of a sudden you have this 100-gallon fuel cell right behind the pilot. But whatever, that's a different story. But then the Mustang really comes into its own when you start incorporating drop tanks. Now these tanks are either made out of paper or metal, believe it or not. And I'm sure everyone has seen images of those. Kevin, you could probably bring up an image or two here, but either had two teardrop tanks on either side of the wings, or you had one big tank underneath. And Chris, I believe the Brits kind of refer to that as a ferry tank. Is that accurate?
That's correct. That's the ferry range that you see there on the Spitfire specs. Is the Spitfire with drop tanks can go just under 1,000 miles, the Spitfire 9.
So yeah, there you get a good glimpse of a wing tank, another drop tank, obviously. But anyway, my point is, pardon me, the Mustang is capable of flying, taking off in Britain or taking off in Italy, and covering these bombers as they go on to their raids throughout Germany, throughout the rest of Europe, and come back too, obviously. Now, what oftentimes would happen is Mustang pilots, these formations would be guarding a formation of bombers, and as soon as they came into enemy fighters, they would have to drop their tanks. Aerodynamically, they suffer in addition to the weight. You can imagine, fuel is at least 7 pounds per gallon. You have two of those things on your wings. That's a lot of weight to shift around. Anyway, so they would drop their tanks and then they would go into kind of the dogfight, stage. But yeah, just very effective range, essentially.
I would assume in combat that it hinders the ability for the plane and much less the climb speed then too.
Correct. Yes.
My great uncle had mentioned with the P-47, he was killed in a training exercise in 44. They were attempting to, I guess, figure out could the P-47 effectively dive with the tank still attached, and then release its payload and then climb out. And he never climbed out. And that was, there's a whole different reasoning, I'm sure, for all of that. But it does let you get to the fight when you need to get somewhere. But along the way, if you run into some issues, it probably slows you down a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Aerodynamics are affected. Like you said, the yaw rate, climb rate, everything's affected. And unfortunately, the Mustang went through, similar pains. Tuskegee Airmen, I think they were originally outfitted with the B model. And that was before they had installed that large internal tank after the pilot. And one of their commanding officers, he went up in one of those early C models, I guess it was, then with the internal tank just after the pilot. And there was so much fuel back there, so much mass. He got up and he tried to do a maneuver that was perfectly capable, within the B model, and he didn't come home. The plane was a totally different beast. And again, that's internal. I mean, those drop tanks it's a nightmare. Or why I can imagine to be a nightmare. I'm not a fighter pilot, but from what I read, from my knowledge of this kind of thing, not something you want to go into a dogfight.
Yeah. And Chris, what about the Spitfire? Now, obviously, everyone knows the Spitfire because it essentially saved Britain for the first 2 years of the war.
Both of these fighters are products of their time. When the Spitfire is designed in the late 1930s, the assumption was going to be, because the German fighters were known to be very short-legged, and of course that is, if anybody studied the Battle of Britain, you're no doubt aware that the effective combat range, which is different than the flying range, the combat range makes assumptions for use of fuel in combat and then back. So it's kind of your effective range of operations. And it was usually about 60%, 50 to 60% of what your actual flying range was. So just in case you're wondering, the Spitfire 9 could actually go about 479 miles on its internal fuel. But its combat range, for a combat mission, practically was about 250 miles, as you can see. Because of those assumptions that the only planes that would be able to reach the United Kingdom from Germany, and everybody was assuming in the late 1930s that Holland, Belgium would probably remain neutral, it would probably be a World War I style conflict, meant that the Spitfire would be air superiority against bombers primarily. And if it had to go against German fighters, it could, but it would probably go against German fighters as protecting tactical air forces on the battlefront. So those are the planning assumptions. In the spring of 1940, it is already clear, as both sides are beginning to bomb each other, that there's a longer range fighter that is necessary. And this is one of the many reasons that the RAF approaches North American aviation to create what will become the Mustang, as we've talked about already. You can see how these two planes actually in many ways complement each other in terms of range and in terms of what they do. And it's those assumptions, the assumptions from the British side that it's going to be a continental war. And then Spitfire spends a lot of her career from 1940, 41, 42, 43, doing fighter sweeps over France. And they will escort American bombers basically as far, with some of these ferry range tanks, as far as the German border. And then they'll have to turn around. And they actually are the first. They take over a large part until the P-47s and ultimately the P-51s show up. It's the Spitfires that carry the large load of bomber escort for the 8th Air Force. But their mission is, and you can see the ranges right there, the fighter escort ranges. But you can see their missions are basically they call them rhubarb operations. And it's one of these that Badger we were talking about, Freiberg is his name, Pilot Officer Freiberg, was shot down on the way back over as he's coming back. And like I said, probably at the bottom of the English Channel. But the idea was to provoke responses from the Luftwaffe. And they got into some pretty significant air battles with the Messerschmitt 109s and the Focke-Wulf 190s over France, which is kind of a forgotten part. When you think about the air war over Europe, 42, 43, we tend to think of it in terms of bombers. But for the RAF, it was definitely a Spitfire war for sure. One other thing that I would mention right now, in case people are wondering about the relative merits of each one, is that the American Eagle squadrons flew the Spitfires, and then they were transferred into the USAAF in late 1942 as the 4th Fighter Group. But for another about year or so, they would fly Spitfires and then ultimately P-47s and then P-51s. There were 2 other air groups from the USAAF that flew Spitfires in the Mediterranean, the 31st and the 52nd. And they picked up Spitfires in North Africa. And the Spitfires in North Africa, the Spitfires in defense of Malta, are outstanding. They do outstanding work for the Royal Air Force and alter the course of the war there. The Americans, when they were traded out for P-51s in March of 1944, did not like it. Most of the pilots did not want to give up their Spits. They liked how the Spitfire turned. They liked how it was a better dogfighter. And actually, one of the British designers said later, he's like, if I had to be in a dogfight over Berlin, I'd want to be in a Spitfire. The Germans themselves agreed with this. They said that the Spitfire was their most formidable opponent in a dogfight. But the designer made another comment as well. He said, if I'm over Berlin in a Spitfire, I may not be able to make it home. And that, to me, is an interesting contrast when you look at these fighters and how they, in many ways, they complement each other. They were designed to do specific jobs. Spitfire was designed to defend the United Kingdom and to fight a war in the nearby air war over nearby countries. And the Spitfire did that extremely, extremely well. And oh, by the way, speaking of altering the course of the war, it was a Spitfire that injured Erwin Rommel in that famous strafing attack on the 17th of July, 1944. I digress. The P-51 Mustang was designed to do what it did. And if you look at American bombers, and maybe this is a whole conversation for a whole other time about bomber philosophy, the American Air Force believed in power projection, inflicting sharp blows at great distances. The B-17 is designed that way. The B-29 and the B-24 are definitely designed that way. The P-51 is designed to be the fighter to take them there and back.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting commentary on the different philosophies of the services and the different jobs that they are designed to do. They do them both very well. Spitfire did it brilliantly well from first to last.
Well, I think that's a resounding segue straight into combat effectiveness, which is our second category. And you covered quite a bit there already with the spit. This is obviously, I don't know if this is exactly the one that you were referring to in the Mediterranean theater.
This is a group of Spitfires over Tunisia in 1943,
Okay.
and you can see they're Spitfire 9s actually. So it's the airplane we've been talking about. One of the things that I point out is the versatility of the Spitfire. Requires some modifications, but it can't. But the Spitfire served in every theater of the war with considerable distinction. One of the things I'd point out to you is right below the propeller, you can see the what looks like a kind of a protrusion right below it, right there, right where you have your cursor. That's the modified desert air intake filter for sand. And that's one of the reasons why the USAAF, when they started ditching their P-40s in Tunisia and North Africa in 1943, got the Spitfires, because the Spitfires had already been proven to be in combat in the dusty African and then, of course, the Italian conditions as well. And so, this is an example right here of with a few modifications, the Spitfire can be a versatile aircraft and can go all over the place. And an underappreciated part of the war is what the Spitfires and what the RAF had to do with the Italian Air Force and the German Air Force, particularly the Italians, which don't get the credit that they deserve. Even the RAF admitted that they were very formidable opponents. And it was nip and tuck for a long time for the RAF. But what tipped the balance was these Spitfires just like these.
It is really much, like you mentioned, a product of the time that they're used. Here you've got the defense of the island. The going after the German bombers pretty much over home airspace, and of course for Greg's contender, the idea is that seeing the further part of the war, which is taking the fight across the channel, further beyond the borders. But the Spitfire has a very unique ability, or at least documented ability. Can you tell us a little bit about this one here, Chris?
This is a great photo. One of the things, the Germans started firing V1 and V2 rockets into the United Kingdom in 1944. And the V1s, as you can see there, take off on a track. They look like flying planes. They're the first kind of grandfather of the cruise missile, if you will. They got two stubby wings and they're flying, and they call them a buzz bomb because they make a buzzing sound as they approach their target. Spitfires would be used in the defense of the United Kingdom, and some Mustangs, I might add, but primarily because it fell to the RAF. It was RAF piloted Mustangs and Spitfires. The Spitfire had enough speed, because these V1s were almost supersonic, that sometimes they didn't even have to shoot at them. They could fly up right next to them. And as you can see, touch wings, and all you have to do as the Spitfire pilot is just flip over just a little bit, put your wing underneath the V1 wing, flip over, the V1 flips the other way, it throws off its gyro compass, which then locks up, and the V1 goes right and drops right into whatever's below, which is
hopefully
usually the Kent or Sussex countryside.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the channel. But that's speed, that's agility, that's maneuverability. If you start thinking through that sounds like a simple evolution, but when you start thinking about the characteristics you need in an aircraft to be able to do that, Spitfire was tailor-made for that mission, among many others.
Well, and I would say, before we get into Greg's here, both are so iconic. I mean, if you're talking about, you say you're a British citizen, and what do you see in the air defending you? You want to see the silhouette of the Spitfire. You want to see, that tapered wing, because that's what'll come out of the war is that's the workhorse of the RAF. Just like for the United States, I would say probably one of the most recognizable silhouettes is the P-51 with the little hump on the bottom with the intake. And so I mean, just from a marketing standpoint, you really want the Spit at least above there. So let's go across the channel And let's take a look at, let's go back to this one here quick, with one eye on the clock. And let's talk about this, Greg. What do we got for me here? How does the P-51 compare in terms of combat effectiveness and impact on the war?
Well, again, the increased range of the Mustang was obviously valuable. Another thing that happened, kind of evolved as the European theater evolved, where once we got our hands on these Mustangs and they were escorting our bombers, again, top brass they changed their philosophy too. Chris alluded to it before. The Spitfire was kind of a reactionary, tool to some extent. They would wait for these German bombers to form up over France across the channel, and they would scramble up, and take them on. Well, when the Mustang came into the theater, you're escorting these bombers. You have your drop tanks intact and whatever. You're hanging above the bomber formation, waiting, for these German fighters to show up. Early on in the war, the fighters were just limited to protecting the bombers. All of a sudden now they're allowing the Mustangs, okay, yeah, let's get these German fighters up in the air, but instead of just hanging out with the bomber groups, let's go get them. Let's take the fight to them. Drop your tanks and go blow them out of the sky. What that enabled us to do was just establish air superiority over all of them. And again, really changed the war.
I think what's interesting about this graphic in particular, because if you think about it, so here we have March of '44. You've got the P-51 with the drop tanks, and its range can reach Prague. It can go past Munich, actually into northern Italy there. But also at this point, you have to remember that the Allied troops were already about halfway up Italy. And you've got bases and airfields that are launching from this way. So now your coverage is coming from both sides, and you've got envelopes on both sides, if you will. And so the Spitfire, even being in Italy, Chris, you'd have that coverage into southern Germany.
Not just southern Germany, but also into the Balkans.
Yeah.
And down in Greece. You can really dominate the Mediterranean from the air bases. And that's one of the big reasons Italy was invaded, is to take the air bases around Foggia and elsewhere in the southern, kind of southeastern part of Italy. For that reason, you dominate the Mediterranean, but you're also then able to reach out and touch through your air forces. And the Spitfire, particularly supporting the armies and acting against German transportation and German logistics in Italy, really helped the Allies. There's an operation called Operation Strangle that is mounted in the late spring of 1944 to try and cut the Germans off in advance of the wake of the Anzio breakout. And the RAF is right there. The Desert Air Force, as they're still known, is doing great work down there, both as fighter bombers, but also as air superiority fighters. And so, yeah, the Spitfire, the Spitfire, we think of it often, the Battle of Britain, defensive fighter, but the Spitfire was more than capable of holding its own in offensive missions. And the Spitfire, by the way, was one of the first fighters based over in Normandy when they captured the first air bases on the British sector. And for months was an essential element of, being right there from the beachhead, getting air supremacy over the beachhead and enabling the Allied armies to do what they needed to do to break out. So the Spitfire, again, you look at the P-51 acting as with the bombers, in conjunction with the bomber offensive. The Spitfire is looking more defense of the United Kingdom, air superiority over the battlefront, and then acting in concert with ground forces. And that, again, slightly different missions, both air superiority fighters. Spitfire does it so well. And without the Spitfire and the Hurricanes winning the Battle of Britain in 1940, none of this would have been possible in the first place. I have to throw that out there too.
Yeah, it would have been over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And you're looking at this map. I mean, sure, your P-51 can go further, but if we just put it over here, we can go just as far.
Well, and actually, that's one of the things that the Spitfire, once the Allied breakout across France happens and they start capturing old German air bases, which were previously French air bases, and they displace the Spitfire squadrons forward. By 1945, the Spitfires are roaming all over Germany and performing escort roles. You know, the Spitfire is very much an active part of the Allied air war to the very end.
Excellent. Now, we did kind of loop in the combat effectiveness with the impact on the war, I think. So with it being 10 minutes left in our program time, I do want to give time for questions at the end. So let's do some closing arguments. And if there was something that we missed because we didn't fully address or in its own, the impact on the war, gentlemen, please use those arguments within your closing arguments here. And we'll start with, again, age before beauty, but it's just as beautiful, the Spitfire.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I think it's been a great discussion. I simply will, whenever I'm trying to debate the relative merits or trying to decide the relative merits of this unit versus that unit, this tank, this plane, whatever, versus the other one. Actually, to me, I go to the, not customer, but the recipient of whatever this thing is and what they're trying to do. And in this case, it's the Germans. Which one of these fine planes did the Germans rate their most dangerous opponent and the one that they were most concerned about? It was not the Mustang. It was the Spitfire. And so as we close, considering all the other discussions that we've had, you know, and again, these are two excellent aircraft. I am not arguing that the Mustang is a bad aircraft. Far from it. If I was a B-17 crewman and I saw Spitfires come up to escort me, I'd love it. If I saw Mustangs come and escort me, I'd love it too. I think these are both outstanding. And as you said, some of the iconic, if not the iconic, Allied land-based planes, land-based fighters of the war. But at the end of the day, when I need a tiebreaker, I go see what the other side said. And the other side put the Spitfire first. And for me, in addition to everything that we've talked about already about what the Spitfire did during the war, starting with the defense of Britain in 1940, which made everything else possible, a world-changing event, along with the hurricane. I do have to put that in there. Spitfire's number one.
Greg?
Well, you know, I wasn't there, but I'll quote Mustang ace and Brigadier General Thomas Hayes said the Merlin-powered P-51 had the three qualities you need most if you're going to escort bombers into Berlin: range, range, and range.
And mic drop. Well, I thank you, gentlemen, both very much. I'm going to just close here before we go to questions, and I will say a couple things. One, again, just for fairness, because we had to keep it so that you guys could actually have a contender, I'm only going to leave it with this. Ivan Schwartz of LaVale, Wisconsin, of the 4th Infantry Division on D-Day, recounted in his oral history, our Air Force P-47s, God bless them, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for them. And that's all I'm going to say. Now, it's a whole different category. I'm just going to say that, just so you guys can just keep that in the back of your minds. That's all. And with that, I do thank everyone for joining us. We will go to questions here next, but I want to say one thing. And the whole idea with this conversation is that history can be fun. It can be debated. It can be kind of a banter back and forth because it is just interpretation. It is just different passion and different interests. At the heart of it, though, as we have demonstrated, hopefully here and everything that we do at the Veterans Museum, it's the person behind the equipment that makes the difference. It's the human element to it. And in both cases, both for the British Airmen and the American Airmen flying both the P-51 and the Spitfire, because they both did, it really is their abilities and their achievements that make the difference. So thank you all for joining us. I do hope you'll join us again. If you have another idea of what we can debate differently, or add to the let's see, we could call it a battle royale, if you will. And again, P-47 is just a classification of its own, so I don't even think we need to do a fighter bomber category, because come on. But with that, thank you all very much. And Eric, I turn it back over to you. Or maybe I don't.
Not sure Eric was quite ready for that.
I was getting the
Is this the
last
first time I'm
question
on time for once?
And like Kevin, I had too many screens up, so I was trying to fight through that.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
the first time
absolutely.
that I was actually able to cut it down to the actual time limit that we were supposed to have.
Well, and this has generated a lot of questions too, so I think we're definitely going to go over on our time, but that's all right. Let me bring these up here real quick. So the first question, guys, is which aircraft could take the most punishment up in here and keep flying?
Well, Kevin, if you could share, I gotta get out of this full screen here. The tail or the nose.
Yep.
In the runway.
If I can just taking over the screen share for a second.
Okay, sorry. So the Mustang, it's interesting. What we had was a lot of manufacturing capability. We could produce thousands of these. What we didn't have were a whole lot of pilots. The Mustang was built extremely robustly, as you saw earlier in our specs. It's heavier. And Kev, if you could flash to the one tough P-51 or that other crashed image. Pilots soon recognized the fact that the Mustang can keep competing and still make it home. So they were overbuilt. They were probably overpowered too, but whatever. They were just incredibly tough airframes. They did have a vulnerability with their underbelly and the cooling system, but no one's brought that up yet, so we won't get into that.
I'll simply say the earlier versions of the Spitfire were not as well armored as the later versions. And so you'll see a lot of accounts. However, pilot survivability, particularly during the Battle of Britain, when you see some of the damage that those planes took and either were able to get back over England where the pilot could bail out, or were able to, the pilot was able to escape a burning aircraft. The pilot survivability was pretty good. Just it was built differently than the Mustang was. Again, later versions. The Spitfire went through 24 versions between 1938 and its final service. So it depends on what version you're talking about with the Spitfire. But both of these planes could take some punishment and could stay in the ring.
Next question, gentlemen. What did the respective countries think of the other's aircraft? And I think you might have touched on this a little bit during the discussion.
Yeah, I think Chris has this one. First of all, we didn't have like Spits flying over US, but I think Chris's point before about like, oh, if Germany feared the Spitfire, that says a lot. They're obviously a very powerful fighter.
When you say respective countries, I'm not sure if they mean allied countries or if they mean Axis countries, because really it's two different answers. Allied country, and I would submit on all sides, this is true. Just based on the face of the question, is that everybody studied everybody else's aircraft. Everybody had captured aircraft, they assembled captured aircraft, and they studied them. And what was better? Like the Focke-Wulf 190 was designed to be better than the Spitfire. And then once the British had captured a couple, they figured out how to upgrade the Spitfire to be better than the FW-190. The Mustang, part of its design was based on some of this as well. So this idea of seeing what the others are doing, what we can learn from, goes through. And I think you see that particularly in the development of the Mustang, where we're going to take this amazing power plant from this amazing British fighter, in other words, the Merlin engine from the Spitfire, and put it into the P-51 airframe, and this thing is going to be a world beater. And that's what happened. And so I think that to me speaks a lot about kind of the spirit of cooperation, particularly among the Allied air forces. And of course, keeping up with the enemy. I mean, this is an arms race and a technology race that you don't want to lose, particularly with what's riding on the outcome of the air war as the war goes on.
All right, next question. Do you know the loss rates of each type of aircraft during the war?
I can tell you the loss rate for the Spit. This is a very difficult question because it goes into different variations. It goes into different times. It goes into a lot of different things. The loss rate for the Spit during the Battle of Britain was 2.5 Germans shot down for every 1 Spit lost. So it's difficult to do that for the entire war because there's so many variables, but at least for the Battle of Britain, which is, I use the Ministry of Defense dates for that. It's July 10th, 1940 to the 31st of October, 1940. That's the loss rate for the Spitfires vis-a-vis their German opponents. I'm not sure what the P-51.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I have that handy. Yeah,
And see, when you talk about the war, we've limited this solely to Europe, because when you talk about the war, then you get into the Pacific, China, Burma, India, where both of these aircraft fought. And then there's Lend-Lease to get to the Soviets, because both of these aircraft, I believe the P-51, I know the Spit was Lend-Leased. I believe the P-51 was also to the Soviets. And so that's why it's difficult to give a precise number. But you can break it down in a couple of different ways, depending on what you're looking at.
All right. Can you talk a little bit about the pilot training programs for each country and how that might have impacted the operation of each plane? And again, I think they're talking about the Brits and the Americans here.
The British had a several months training program in the air and ground crew. The Commonwealth Air Training Plan was what they called it, because after the fall of France, they started outsourcing it to Australia and particularly Canada. And that's where a lot of Badgers that end up in the Royal Canadian Air Force or the RAF, they go up there and take their training in Canada. And it's basic training followed by ground school, followed by at least a month, if not longer, of air. During the crisis of the Battle of Britain, they actually shortened that to 2 weeks. And then realized pretty quickly that you send up a pilot after only 2 weeks and basically 20 hours in the air against German aces. It's actually better to keep them on the ground and keep training them because they have a better chance to survive. The Americans, and Greg, jump in here, the American training pipeline was of similar duration. And one of the other things that both services did, and I think this is important, is after a while, the aces rotated to training squadrons or rotated to command. So they were able to pass on their experience to other people. The Germans and the Japanese, you flew until you died.
Yeah, they didn't have that luxury.
No. And that fact right there made a huge difference in the relative quality of the Air Forces over time, Allied versus Axis. I don't know if you have anything to add, Greg, but that's...
Well, I have a transcript from Clifford Bowers, who is a Wisconsinite that flew P-51s, over Europe. And in his oral history, he alludes to the fact that his training was like 11 months. He said that's all they did, was train. And this is pretty late in the war too. I would imagine as the war progressed, that training got a little bit sharper. But yeah, he does comment. I'm sorry, I can't find the exact period, but he does comment on how extensively they train. And they would go from airfield to airfield. They would be down in Alabama and do work with field artillery. They were in Kansas. They were all over the place. And this is obviously before they hopped the pond and started training in England before they really got into things. So yeah, I apologize, but I think the Allies did it better. They obviously had more personnel, and I think they I think they treated their training a little bit better, as Chris said. You know, you take those top guys out and let them teach people something. Bowers said when he got into combat, you know, of course, you start off as like a wingman, so you're following someone else's lead essentially. After he became, you know, a lead, he told his guys, just watch me, learn from me. So again, he was taking that, you know, that instructional role on and trying to keep his buddies alive.
All right, gentlemen. Approximately how long could each plane stay engaged in combat before their ammunition was depleted?
I don't know that there's a real definitive answer to that. You know, I mean, if you're, you know, if you're in a dogfight the entire time, you know, you're going to deplete your ammo. Versus if I'm trying to bring up the rounds that we both have. Okay, so the Mustang has nearly 2,000 rounds of ammunition. And what is the fire rate on the BAR, Kev?
That's less than 5 minutes of firing, Greg.
Yeah, it's not very long.
That assumes you don't melt the barrels if you
Yeah.
hold down the firing key and fire
really.
all 2,000 rounds at once.
Yeah, if you're at 10,000 feet, you know, where again those guns are going to heat up pretty quickly. You know, yeah, you're gonna exhaust your resources.
Well, frozen guns were an issue too. You know, gun malfunctions at 20, 25,000 feet.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, good point. You get up there and yeah, you're dealing with the opposite condition. But yeah, hopefully you're controlling your bursts, you know, and being effective. But yeah, you don't have a whole lot. You don't have as much as you can never have enough ammo. Let's just leave it at that.
Well, and it's interesting because I think correct me if I'm wrong, but the Spit has 2 Browning 50 cal guns on the wings and carries 1,400 rounds, whereas the Mustang has 6 50 cal barrels and carries 1,800, or just over 1,800 rounds. And it's very interesting because I wonder if there's a big difference with the 6 versus the 2 and the terms of the length of expenditure, because all 6 would be firing versus 2.
British pilots learned very quickly, and in fact, they taught this in their training. And to your point, Greg, senior pilots would teach this to junior pilots. And if anybody wants to, there's a movie about the Polish 303 squadron that goes through their training program, and then of course they rolled in the Battle of Britain, called Mission of Valor, which is outstanding. And they talk about rate of fire, and they say fire in 3 to 5 second bursts at most. And because that's what, otherwise it's it's ineffectual. You're going to burn and most dogfights usually lasted about 50. Well, I should say over England, over the Battle of Britain, most dogfights were 15 to 20 minutes. And some of that's the Germans had to break away because of lack of fuel. But even over in the combined bomber offensive, the dogfights and the aerial battles are not. It's a long period of boredom separated by, punctuated by a period of extreme activity and terror as the Germans show up.
Next question. Which aircraft had the better success rate of kills during the war?
This is another one that's tricky because you're factoring in the Pacific as well. The Spitfire had the greater number of kills during the war just by virtue of it being around as longer. And again, how do you define success rate of kills? Is this air to air? Is this air to ground? You know, it's difficult to. Both of them, but between them, won air supremacy over Europe for the Allies. And, we're getting the better of the Germans all the way to, for a significant part of the war.
Yeah, the closest that I can come here is a statement by May 8th, 1945, the 8th, 9th, and 15th Air Force's P-51 pilots claimed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft shot down, excuse me. That was about half of all U.S. Army Air Force's claims in the European theater, the most claimed by any Allied fighter in air-to-air combat. So again, those were air-to-air kills at approximately 5,000. But yes, that's as close as I can get to answering that.
Still, that's kind of an impressive number.
That's a lot.
It is. It's an impressive statistic.
I'm just going to throw this out here. One of the most famous successes, air successes, the P-47 was the first plane to bring down an ME-262. Just saying, which is the jet plane.
I thought you were going to talk about the P-38 shooting down Yamamoto.
Well, I mean that too. But no, I'm just saying the P-47, a prop plane, took down a jet plane. The very first one. Now, granted, they didn't actually shoot. They just forced the plane down. But either way, it's the P-47.
Yeah, anything's fair in love and war.
I mean, the Spitfire 9, actually, the Royal Canadian Spitfire 9 is the first one to shoot down an ME-262, but that doesn't count. The P-47 brought the first one down.
What's the next question, Eric?
How did each aircraft perform when engaging ground targets? Something that's kind of been brought up over and over again when you're talking about how to filter these different statistics.
Well, the Spitfire had modified versions for ground attack, and you could see they carried bombs, and they did perform quite a few tactical missions, tactical air missions. They were very effective. The Hurricane and the Typhoon were the best, but the Spitfire most definitely could hold its own, particularly in those rhubarb missions where they'd go strafe German flak positions. They'd also go strafe airfields and things of that nature, and they really could stir up some hornet's nest. And we didn't even talk about the Spitfire reconnaissance version that could reach out and cover a lot of ground. In fact, it was a Spitfire that first found the Bismarck and found that she was on her way out to the North Atlantic in May of 1941. So the Spit in her various guises was a very versatile aircraft.
I think the Mustang was very potent too, as I alluded to. It did have a weakness. Again, the same motor. They're both liquid cooled engines. Many aircraft at this point were still air cooled. So they didn't have to rely on a radiator or anything like that to keep their engines cooled. The Mustang and the Spit did. The Mustang had a very large air scoop in the back. They had coolant lines that ran underneath the airplane. They're very susceptible to ground fire. Even a rifle could penetrate one of those things, and then you're done. However, again, citing like Bowers' oral history, he talks about this guy when he gets over there. His wingman basically he's blowing up anything on the ground that he can. He's using his Brownings, his machine guns, and he's talking about lifting cars off the ground. Just the sheer firepower that the plane had. Again, as Kevin pointed out, with 6 Brownings, just blazing. It must have been just terrifying.
God, that's kind of like on par with a Warthog almost with 650 cals.
Oh, don't bring in. Oh boy, those are fighting words there. But yeah, and Bowers talks about like they're blazing up these ground targets. They're so powerful and they're flying so low that mud and dirt's actually coming up and like clouding their vision. It's staggering.
Gentlemen, at what point in the war did these planes have free reign over Europe?
This is a fun debate that we could probably go on and on about. I would say May of 44.
Halfway, yeah.
I'd say, because by that point, you've knocked out a significant part of the German Air Force. And then you just look at the amount of sorties that the Allied Air Force flew on June 6, 1944, relative to the Luftwaffe on that day. By one measure, the Luftwaffe flew 250 sorties that day. Yeah. The RAF and the USAAF, between them, flew 9,000.
Good grief.
And if that's not the definition of free reign, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Now, you could still die over in the air over Europe. I mean, there were airmen that died, were being shot down as late as April and the first week of May 1945. But the idea that when did the Allies have total air supremacy? That's when I put it.
Well, and that's a portion of the plan for D-Day, is that you have to have, one of the components is you have to have air superiority. So that's why you have Big Week.
Yeah, February 44. That's right.
Next question, gentlemen. Did the Mustang make the difference for the U.S. in the Pacific?
Ooh, see, we're getting outside the parameters a little bit.
Yeah. I didn't really hone in on my Mustang in the Pacific Theater stats. Boy, you kind of caught me off guard there.
Would you like me to have fun with this one, Greg?
Sure.
I'll tell you, both planes, the answer is yes. The Spitfire was the Zero and the Oscar met their match over Burma and over Southeast Asia when the Spitfires showed up. Mustang A's were also involved in the China, Burma, India theater, but when the Mustang D's started showing up in the Pacific, particularly with the 5th Air Force and the 7th Air Force in the late summer, early fall of 1944, they swept the skies. And by the time the summer of 45 rolls around, say April, May timeframe, from that point on, P-51s rule the air along with the B-29s over the home islands. So the Mustang definitely made its mark in the Pacific, as did the Spit. Made their marks in the Pacific, no doubt about that.
That sounds like another good topic would be to look at the aircraft over in the Pacific.
We talked about that as a sequel, Eric.
I think we only have a couple more here. Everybody's really interested in this topic. You guys did a great job today, too.
Thank you.
The Spit is often considered an unforgiving lady for the newbies, new pilots. When landing on that tricycle undercarriage, most specifically, was the Mustang a bit kinder to new pilots?
That's interesting. I have heard, Kev, maybe we could get a couple of comparison shots with the third wheel, the tail.
Yeah. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Well, he's hunting for that. I will agree about the Spitfire. In fact, there's a documentary on Netflix a couple of years ago, and there was a female ferry pilot said that the Spitfire was. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's very close. The Spitfire was at its best in the air, but Spitfire did not like to be on the ground, and it could be very temperamental on the ground.
Yeah, Bowers refers to making a Navy landing with a P-51 one time, and I think what would happen is you just don't have a whole lot of suspension back there, so they pogo. You collapse that tire, you don't have any more give, and so they would come up, and I think that's how that one fellow ended up with his prop in the runway. But I have not come across anything about being unforgiving for newbies. That's an interesting question.
Well, and the last question gets even more interesting because it definitely goes outside of the parameters of your discussion today, but it is the last one. And this one says Israelis flew both types of planes in 1948. And this person would be interested to know what they thought of each plane and what roles they were used for. I don't know if that's a completely different discussion altogether.
It's a good thing when I was refreshing my notes this morning that I took a quick look at the Spit in the Israeli War for Independence. Greg, I don't know. Do you look like you're hunting for something? So I'll go on for a second and then
take over.
It's actually the only time Spitfires flew against each other because the Egyptians, and I think the Jordanians had some Spits also. The Spitfire, Israeli Air Force used the Spitfire in all roles, fighter, bomber, to considerable effect. And so there's no question about that. In terms, I have not delved into this any further than that. So in terms of what people thought about which plane and the relative merits of each, I really don't know. What little I know of that conflict is the Israelis, in particular the Israelis, but all other combatants, used what was to hand. And that includes, of course, both types of planes. But beyond that, I don't really have any details to add.
Well, gentlemen, it has been an excellent conversation. Lots of interest, lots of great facts. As we can tell by the time rate, we've gone way over, but we still have quite a bit of our audience left. So that just speaks to the program that you guys put on today. Fantastic job, gentlemen. And we certainly look forward to more of these debates. I think, like we said earlier, there's a few more topics that have come up during this hour that certainly can be explored. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today. Thank you for your participation, your great questions, and for hanging out with us, 21 minutes over the time, just so we can keep hearing more about this topic. We have a lot more fantastic programming at the museum coming up. You can always find that information at our website, whizbetsmuseum.com. And we look forward to seeing everybody come back for more of our discussions, our book talks, our movie nights, and our trivia and other programs that we have. Kevin, Greg, Chris, thank you very much, gentlemen. Again, wonderful job today.